This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for Lessons Learned. And my guest today is a gentleman who I found some information on Facebook. In fact, Alan, I'm not exactly sure what it was, but there was a post I saw, and I thought, no, I need to read more and started researching. And you really fall into the category of lessons learned. Alan Rucker has, you're a writer,
Right,
um, and you've done a lot of things in Hollywood.
right.
Um, did I read that someplace that you did something on Broadway too?
No, no,
No. Okay.
just
That-
just just the salt mills of American television is where
Okay. Well, and
salt mines of American television. Excuse me.
and when we think of individuals like yourself, those of us who sit at home and watch TV and go to the movies, we think you just have the best life and nothing can ever happen to change that. And the
That's true.
reality of it is you're human and life happens to all of us.
Sure does.
And as I read the information, the good side of randomness, um, wow.
The
Uh,
column I just wrote recently, right?
yeah. So tell us a little bit about number one, how did you get into the TV business?
I got into the TV business through documentaries. I started making documentaries way back in the 70s when video first was introduced. So the group I was with called TV. TV was one of the first groups to actually go out and make documentaries with little, what they called portapacks there.
Mhm.
Kind of, crappy technology, but it allowed us the freedom not to have to go through networks or through hierarchies, et cetera. And so we hit it pretty big. We did a show called The Lord of the Universe about the 16-year-old Guru Maharaji. I don't know if you remember him, people don't. But the show won a Columbia DuPont Journalism Award, which is a very high award. So these little guys with these porta packs all of a sudden had some popularity. That's how, and then we just kind of, you know, you go to Hollywood, you get kind of, we moved from San Francisco to LA and you get sucked in. And so I just started writing in Hollywood. A lot of comedy with people like Martin Mull and Fred Willard and John Candy and a whole group of people.
But you
That's
have
how I got started.
but you have to get noticed somehow because you weren't the only one who went out to California to do some writing.
Uh,
Uh, Lots of people go out there thinking that they're going to hit it big, and uh, boy,
it's
only a
tough.
fraction
It's
can,
tough.
can actually make
We,
it.
we kind of backed in because we had this documentary group and we got some attention. And the William Morris Agency thought, I don't know what they thought. They thought maybe we could do something with these clowns. So they signed the group. They never did anything for the group, but once the group fell apart, uh, I stuck around. So that was a big help getting an agent. Getting an agent is a huge matter. And as I said again, I just kind of backed into it. But it's been, it's not easy. It doesn't come, doesn't come right at you.
Right. And
Uh, Go
you,
ahead.
you're from the Midwest,
Yes,
and really Midwest, Oklahoma.
Oklahoma. Thank you, Bartlesville, Oklahoma, uh,
And
where they're shooting a Marty Scorsese movie right now called
really,
"Killers of the Flower Moon" with Robert De Niro. It's about the murder of Osage Indians way back in the 20s. So it's a big town now because it's got all these stars living in it for 3 weeks, and then they'll leave. And it goes back to being what it was before. Right.
well, and it's interesting because if there is something that you really want to do, one of the things I learned, but I learned it very late in life,
Right.
was just go start doing it and um, make your mark as best you can. And
Right.
you might get noticed, um, and you never know who you're going to meet along the way.
That's for sure. I think what's important is that you may know what you want to do, but you don't exactly know uh, kind of the groove you fit in. Whether it's you come to Hollywood and try to write screenplays, and maybe you should be writing short stories, or you come to Hollywood to to do TV, and maybe you should be writing a column like I do now for an online column. And by the way, that's a way for people to break in now. The internet is really a source, a major source. If you want to make a television show in Hollywood, make a television show wherever you are, put it up on YouTube, try to get some publicity, and you'll get noticed, because there are guys sitting around these agencies now that are doing nothing but watching YouTube all day looking for new talent. Because it's much easier to see if someone can do something by making a small film somewhere else than for them to come in and just hype themselves. So it's a product that you can
Well,
get out of.
and I can say that some of that happened for me. I was writing a blog uh, about my son for a while. My son is on the autism spectrum,
Right,
and um, to look at him, to see him, 99% of everybody would have no idea. But
right,
it's been a struggle for him and for us. And so I was writing these blogs, and I got a contact from somebody who said, if you can write blogs about that, can you write blogs about the aging and how aging is not about growing old and feeble? And I said, oh, you got the right person because I'm aging. Um, and I didn't think of my blogs as being anything other than my personal story that I wanted to leave behind. Um, and I said, well, yeah, certainly I can do it. And then I turned to my husband and I said, am I crazy? And he goes, probably, but do it anyways. And,
right,
the first couple ones they sent back to me and they said, you need to tweak it here or there. And then I started just writing. And before I realized it, I said, well, now I need to use my education. I need a podcast. I need to talk about this stuff.
right,
And success, we all measure differently.
right.
And
Oh,
um,
absolutely.
so it's not about, me being a podcaster that gets millions of views for every show. It's about doing what you love to do, getting
Right,
the word out there and connecting.
exactly. Now, Karen, we've been talking now for a few minutes here, and you didn't mention a salient fact about my current life.
Well, I was just going
And
to ask
no
you
one,
about that.
and no one else would notice it on a
Right.
pod. You want me to explain it?
Well, yeah, I would, because when I read the article, it was like you reinvented yourself.
Yeah. Well, let me just explain to the audience. I'm, you can't tell, you can't see, but I'm sitting in a wheelchair, and I've been sitting in a wheelchair for 25 years. I had there's a saying among disabled people that disability is the only minority in which anyone can join at any time in their life. And I am that anyone. I woke up one Tuesday from a nap. I felt this excruciating pain around my stomach, and I got weaker. My legs got weaker and weaker. And in an hour and a half, I was paralyzed basically for life from the waist down. Uh, I don't want to get technical here, but it's a disorder called transverse myelitis. It's a little bit like MS, except it's when your immune system attacks your spine for God knows what reason. And so that's what happened. My immune system, the inflammation of the spine caused the paralysis by the immune system overreacting or reacting in a wrong way or something wacky. Uh, and that was a real, I mean, it's someone like says people with disabilities. Disability is not 100% of your life, but it takes you a while to get used to it. It's maybe 10% of your life, but it still colors a lot of different things. And it's an excellent prism to see the world, to see how other people react to you, how other people think about themselves. And it's just a prism through which to look. So that's it. That's it. I've been sitting in this chair for 25 years.
Well,
Anyway, and
so
it made a big difference in
yeah,
my writing career too, which we could go into. Made a huge difference.
well, let me ask you this question. When it happened, um, and you were told all of a sudden you take a nap, you wake up, you have pain, and now you're paralyzed. Um, what was your first thought? Do you remember?
Uh, well, it was a joke. It was a joke. I turned to my wife. You're in a complete daze. You don't know. You don't kind of believe it. You haven't internalized it yet. But I turned to my wife and I said, "Is this because I've told too many Christopher Reeve jokes
Oh,
and they're getting back at me?" Uh, it wasn't it. Ironically, I ended up working with Christopher Reeve, and now I work with the Christopher Reeve Foundation. But no, you're just numb. You're in a daze. You don't really know what's going on, and in my experience, and I've had a lot of experience at this. For you are in. Some people I think get very angry. Some people get very sad. Uh, I didn't get angry for some reason, but I felt like I was in mourning. I was mourning the death of half of my body. So I was in that kind of mindset for a long time. And I didn't feel sorry for myself because I knew I could still do a lot of other things. Uh, yeah, sometimes you feel sorry for yourself, but you don't stay in that mind frame. Uh, uh, and you never ask the question. I thought up in the hospital and have one of those pens that has the red thing that comes across, and it says, "Never ask why me, and never complain because no one cares." But never ask why me because it's an unanswerable question, and it only leads you into some kind of introspective despair. There is
absolutely.
no reason. It's random. It was a random event, at least as far as we know, as medical research knows now. There's a word they use called idiopathic. Idiopathic means we don't know, of idiopathic origins, as in, idiot. That's how I remember it. Idiotic. We don't know. And so I have a disorder of idiopathic origins. And here's an important thing, especially for people out there who are going through trauma uh, recently, or have a child going through trauma, or a child that's been diagnosed with autism or something like that, which is that you give that person, there is no uh, guidebook. There isn't a manual how to recover from paralysis and live a happy life. It doesn't exist. Uh, I wrote a book about it, but I gave no guidance. I just said, hang in there and laugh. But what people don't realize is that people in mourning of various kinds, they do it at their own speed. You don't have to, people go up to a widow a week later and say, you need to you need to shake that off. You need to get going and, cheer up. Anyone would ask me in the first 3 months to cheer up. If I could, I would have punched him in the face
Absolutely.
because it's not helpful, and it's not right. It's not the kind of, it's kind of cheap advice. It's a way of people to dismiss what you're going through by sugarcoating it. Well, uh, God only, what my sister-in-law used to say, God only gives us what we can handle.
Right.
That's not true. God gives a lot of people things that they can't handle and they commit suicide, or they, turn to drugs, or they, fall apart or something. So it's not true, but you have to let people change or evolve at their own pace. And sometimes, at least with paralysis, it takes years. It's not like 6 months and then 3 months and then you're really back at it. It takes years. And as I said, there's no manual. It's really a creative process where you have to, as you said, reinvent yourself, or reinvent your attitude towards yourself. Anyway,
Well, and
that's the lesson. There's a lesson learned.
I love that
Yeah.
because you brought up another comment that I think is really important. We've been talking about this on numerous podcasts, and it is about grief. Okay. Th-
Right,
They're all different forms of grief. It's not necessarily the loss of a loved one. It,
right,
in your case, it was the loss of your mobility from the
right.
waist down. And for somebody to say to you, "Well, get over it," or
Yeah,
"Hey, Alan, look at you. You can whiz around in your wheelchair." Well, yeah, maybe, but let me feel what I need to feel to get
right,
through this.
right.
So,
You
one,
isolate
yeah,
people.
go ahead.
People with disabilities, when they first get a disability, tend to withdraw, and others misinterpret that. You know, able-bodied people think that you're withdrawing from life, and you're not withdrawing from life. You're just want to spend more time with yourself, trying to figure out what this is, what's the right attitude, what are you going through, how do you process it, you know, all that kind of psychobabble. But you just leave that time alone. And if you wake up in the morning and you don't feel like getting up, don't get up. You know, don't feel like you have to get up because someone says, well, you know, you got to get up to be a normal person. Get up at 8, have eggs, and, you know, go to work. Well, it takes a while to get to that state. So usually people, at least with disabilities, I know, I can't speak for other traumas. Uh, Usually people with newly found disabilities do withdraw, and it's a healthy thing. It's not an unhealthy thing because they're trying to come to terms with it themselves. And
Well,
they don't need you saying, well, come on, you still got your, my sister from Oklahoma would say, oh, Alan, get over it. You still got your brain. I said, well, maybe I do, maybe I don't. I'll check back with you.
well, and I can certainly relate because about 10 years ago, um, I was at the ear doctor, and the ear doctor said to me, "There's something I don't like inside your ear." And I said, "Okay." And he says, "I'm sending you to a specialist." And he sent me to a specialist. And next thing I know, I was on the operating table because I had a tumor in my ear.
Right.
And
In your ear,
in my ear, yeah.
not pressing against your ear, but actually
It
inside
it
your
was inside the ear and in the canal, and it was
right.
growing. And but they he passed it off as, "Oh, this is no big deal." And when I woke up from surgery, obviously I was having trouble hearing. And after I started healing, I was having trouble hearing, and I kept asking the question, like, "What's going on?" And, "Oh, well, didn't we tell you you were going to lose your hearing?" And yeah,
Hear in one ear, right,
yeah. Well, in one ear, except he decided to go look in the other ear at the same time
right.
and make sure that there was nothing there. And so he did some damage. Let's
Uh,
just put it at that. So here I am healing, and I'm losing my hearing daily. And when I finally, went back to the original doctor, he said, "It's time for hearing aids." And my vision of hearing aids was I was an old lady. Yep,
Something big that
yep.
everyone can see.
And everybody's going to see it and everybody's going to know it. And I'm going to lose my job and everything's going to
Right.
fall apart. And even when I first started wearing them, I hid them with my hair and did everything to avoid talking about them until one day I realized this is who I am. And if I can't hear you, I'm going to let you know I
Right.
can't hear you. And once I opened up and I started talking about, yeah, there were some people, especially in my corporation, who determined that I wasn't as able as I should be. So that's the question I want to ask you. Here you are in the industry, you're in a wheelchair. Did the industry look at you differently and say, you know what, maybe Alan should retire?
No, no one ever said that. Uh, but what happened was that one of the ways you stay alive if you're working in Hollywood is that you become a workaholic. You think about it 7 days a week. You go to a Dodger game, you're sitting there thinking about a pitch you're going to do next week. It kind of takes over your life, and not in a healthy way. I'm not uh, promoting this as a way of thinking, but it's just you really, especially I was pretty much, I had a studio deal for many years, but then starting in the mid '80s, I started freelancing. So a freelancer is always thinking about the next job, always thinking ahead. So when I laid there in the hospital, even though I was in that mood that I told you with, where I didn't want to talk to anyone, uh, I asked for my laptop immediately because I wanted to keep contact with people. There was a project that I had just been invited to be part of. I wanted to jump in and start doing research. So I was anxious to get back to work. First of all, I didn't really know what else to do. It's not a healthy idea. If you have the time and the luxury, you should not do anything after. So if you wake up on a Tuesday morning and you're paralyzed, you should just, you know, kick back. But I didn't have that luxury, and I also didn't have that kind of mental state. So I went right back to work, and I got. In fact, I went back to work so fast. I was working on one project. A guy said, "Could you come to Las Vegas to work on another?" I do a lot of specials and that kind of work.
Mhm.
Could you come to Las Vegas and work with Sinbad on a presentation? And I'm working on another project, right? I said, "Oh, sure, I could do that." So I get in the plane on Friday night and go up there for 3 days, and come back to work on the other project. And it almost killed me. What happened was that I developed blood clots in my lungs. It's called a pulmonary embolism because someone hadn't told me that you need to keep using blood thinner after you leave the hospital. But be that as it may, I I passed out a couple of times. It was really very weird, uh, very much like having a stroke.
Mm.
But I ended up with my doctor at the right time, and that got taken care of. Spent some time at the hospital. So, but I realized that I better not try to operate at the same pace that I thought I should. But yes, people looked at you very differently. At first, especially people that you've worked with, looked at you very sympathetically. They wanted to give you work. So, and the best project I had the first year I was paralyzed was with Christopher Reeve. I co-wrote the only Christopher Reeve television special after he was paralyzed,
Wow.
and it was really a lot of fun. As I said to someone, I because I was feeling like a freak. You feel like a freak. You feel like you belong to this freak show that you don't really want to be part of. There, I felt very normal, not just because of Chris, but because of everyone around him. Uh, he- so it was a really wonderful experience, and you know, uh, Robin Williams sat on my lap, and it was really great. The people were great. It was fun. I wrote some funny stuff, and it was great. It was really the Christopher Reeve special for ABC, which was announcing the formation of the Christopher Reeve Foundation, which is where I'm still associated with. But that was a rare occasion. What I found out, and I think I said this in that article you read, is that people who knew you uh, gave you a shot or two, and they put up with what they consider the inconvenience of having to build ramps and stuff like that. And the specials business usually takes you out of town. It could take you all around the world. It could take you to Nashville. It could take you, I did a special in at Daytona Beach for the for after Dale Earnhardt died, with his wife and son, to raise money for the Dale Earnhardt Foundation at the track. Anyway, so in those days, that was a long time ago, a person with a disability was looked upon as a real oddity. And in fact, as I think I said in that article, producers they hear disability and they hear pain in the butt. It's just trouble. It's just going to be trouble. Something's going to happen. He's going to get sick, something like that. So they thought of all the negative implications. So everyone offered me one or two shots, and then they all of a sudden disappeared. So within a year and a half or so, the phone wasn't ringing anymore. I wasn't getting any calls from people that I'd worked with for years. But, they just had decided that, logistically it was difficult, and they'd given me a shot, and I'd done okay, but they just moved on. Uh, and it's, I don't, again, at that time, there were no people with disabilities working at home, very few, very few who actually worked.
Right.
And I was working all the time for that 2-year period. And then I realized that you mentioned age. There are two things that dawned on me, which is, well, I'm not young. I was in my early 50s. In Hollywood, that's old. I said, well, the phone stopped ringing because either of the paralysis or my age or both. And I have no idea. I never asked anyone. I wasn't going to plead with someone to hire me because I was disabled. I wasn't Tiny Tim, I was going to just move ahead and see how things unfolded. And how things unfolded with me was a wonderful turn of events, which I was very lucky. This is where randomness comes into your life sometimes when you wake up and you're paralyzed, but randomness also comes in your life sometimes when you get a phone call out of the blue that actually changes your life. And I got a phone call out of the blue from a manager who managed David Chase, the guy who created The Sopranos, who I happen to know because we went to college together at Stanford, we went to film school together at Stanford, but I hadn't talked to him in a long while. But I had done during that 2-year period, I'd done a documentary about the mob in the movies for TNT. And I met all these guys they belonged to what they called the Gangster Actors Guild, the guys in New York who did nothing but gangster roles, and they got together for lunch, and because they were dim and those guys, and some
Yep.
of them they all said they had a record, only half of them did, but it doesn't matter. They were in, and one of those guys was the guy who played Paulie Walnuts in The Sopranos, uh,
Okay.
whose name now will escape me, but I'll come back to Tony Sirico. And he was in that documentary, and he showed that documentary to David Chase. And David Chase said, well, I know Alan Rucker. He's a really funny guy. I'm going to hire him to write a book about The Sopranos. Uh, and I said, sure he is. He's represented by the biggest. He's represented by the biggest manager in the world, and there are probably 20 writers that want that job, who have a better resume than I. But no, he decided. He's David Chase. He makes up his own mind, and so he talked me into it. It didn't take much to talk me into doing it, but I said I would do it if I could write it in the style like of other shows. Like this, I said I worked with Martin Mull,
Right.
other shows, kind of the mock documentary style or a faux. So I wrote a book told from none of it's real. Told a book told from the point of view of a guy who was a Sopranos expert, a Sopranos investigative journalist, and he had all this material, so to speak, and I looked it up so that I could write a book from inside of the Sopranos. I had Tony Soprano's high school transcript and Meadow Soprano's discovery card receipts, where she went to McDonald's and used her discovery card to buy a hamburger. And so I wrote this kind of, funny tongue-in-cheek book, and it did really well. It was first published in England, and then it was published here. And I followed that up with some other books, but the next book, Sopranos book I wrote, which is called The Sopranos Family Cookbook, which was somewhat had an idea. People like sit in front of the TV and they eat and they watch, and the Sopranos eat virtually in every scene of the
Right.
show. Go back and look, every scene. I used to say that wise guys get up in the morning, they eat breakfast, they eat lunch, they eat dinner, they go out and kill someone, and then they come back and eat a fourth meal, you know, because they feel guilty or something. I don't know, or they're all 300-pound guys, so they eat a lot. So, and I thought it was a good idea. And I said, well, I only want to do it if I could do it in the same style as I did before. So if you remember Artie Bucco that owned the restaurant in The Sopranos,
Right.
I told it from Artie Bucco's point of view, Artie Bucco's voice, that he went around essentially, and each chapter what's right good about I didn't do anything with the recipes. Another person did that. She did a great job. But each chapter of the book focused on one character and their relationship to food, and through Arnie. So no one gets killed in a cookbook. So you can make merciless fun of the characters, and it's never going to turn dark or that dark, right? And it was a blast to write. I think it was the most fun I've ever had. And it became a New York Times #1 bestseller for 6 weeks. Uh, and it was, and then I realized that this is what I should be doing. I should be writing, not just comedy stuff, but I just should be writing prose, not screenplays, not teleplays, not sketch comedy for specials or for comedy specials and stuff, but this. So that's what I started doing. And I wrote a book about myself, which has really turned the corner for me. I don't know if you've read it. If you haven't, you have to hang up and go get it.
Okay.
It's came out in 2008, I think. It's called The Best Seat in the House, How I Woke Up one Tuesday and Was Paralyzed for Life. And it's a memoir of everything I'm telling you about right now, of waking up on a Tuesday and being paralyzed, and what do you do then? And so the book kind of chronicles that, makes a few digressions, but
Now,
it really it got very well reviewed. It was a New York Times editor's choice. It didn't sell that many books, but I guess maybe at that point, and maybe at this point, unless you're Christopher Reeve, books about disability don't funny books about disability don't really attract people anyway. But I'm really happy to do it because that really cemented what I wanted to do in life, and that's what I've kept doing.
well, and I understand from a
I
mutual.
talk too much.
No, 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 absolutely not. But I understand from a mutual friend of ours, David Zimmerman, that
Right.
you are
Wonderful.
very involved with actors and writers,
Right.
all with disabilities, giving them the opportunity and the guidance. And I've been very lucky through David to be able to interview many of them. And, it's I love that we do it on Zoom because sometimes you can't see the disability, but like you did, you discussed it, you showed it. Yes.
Did you see it?
Yeah. Well, I can see you rolling back and forth. So yes.
I'm not kidding. Yeah, David Zimmerman is a wonderful guy. He's an actor, he's a disability activist and a director and a talent agent. He does a lot of things with the disabled. What happened was, and this is another lesson learned, okay? When I became disabled, when I ended up in a wheelchair, the last person I wanted to hang around with is someone else in a wheelchair. I did not want to be part of that group. As I said, I thought of it as a freak show, and I didn't want to be part of that freak show. So I kind of kept my distance, as it were, until I got drug. I was a longtime member of the Writers Guild of America, where all writers in Hollywood belong to the Writers Guild. Anyway, but I got sucked in by this guy to come to a meeting of the Writers with Disabilities Committee, and I realized very quickly that no, these are the people I do want to hang around with, not because you don't see them. If you're in a wheelchair, you don't see someone else and see the wheelchair first. You see the person first, because most of them had the blackest sense of humor I ever had, blacker than mine, and I thought it was great. And so I kind of got drawn into it, and then a couple of years later, all of a sudden, I'm the chair of the Writers with Disabilities Committee, and that was 14 years ago.
Wow.
And I recently stepped down because I just want to get back to just writing. But so that was the beginning of my activism in Hollywood. And here's a great statistic. When I joined the group, I like to say there were 4 or 5 people. 2 of them were quadriplegics who could hardly come to the meetings. And the meetings were held on a Friday afternoon because no one was employed. When I left, there's 60 members. There are lots of people employed. There's a momentum. They're out there talking every day, people making contacts with people making contacts. And so it's a really vibrant group, and it bodes well for, the inclusion of people with disabilities in Hollywood. as long as all those, because when those people get out there and they start writing, like on television shows, they start out as a staff writer, then they become what is known as a story editor, then they become, uh, uh, some kind of producer. They add producer title to lots of people's names because that means they don't have to pay the Writers Guild 6% of that money. True. Anyway, and then all of a sudden they become what are known as showrunners. Showrunners are the people who are in control of a show, whether they created it or not. So as soon as there are people with disabilities who are showrunners, and that's about to happen, they're going to hire more people with disabilities. It's most likely that they will hire more actors with disabilities because that will open the door for stories about people with disabilities. So there's a growth, but it's a slow glacial thing. As I told you, it took me 14 years to build a committee to that point, but it's a good thing. You will see out there, you people, you will see more people with disabilities on television now than anyone has ever seen before. It's not like they pop up at every show, and it's a very small percentage when you talk about speaking roles. I mean, it's minuscule really, but you will see in shows like Rami on Hulu, or shows like Special on Netflix, or The Good Doctor on CBS, ABC.
ABC.
What?
ABC.
ABC. Well, that guy who I've talked to and interviewed and know very well is uh, he hires, even though the kid, the Good Doctor, who plays the autistic guy isn't autistic.
Right.
He's such a good actor that David Shore, the producer, hires, has a lot of disability stories in that show. And he hires people with disabilities, including people with autism.
Yes.
And they say, it doesn't matter. He's so good that they could easily relate to him. Well, you know this because
Oh,
you know,
watching him, I mean,
right.
it's hard to believe that he is not on the spectrum.
So good. But that actually wouldn't happen anymore. If they did a show now with a doctor with autism, the pressure would be to hire someone who's autistic. And David Shore, the creator of The Good Doctor, in the writer's room, there's one writer, wonderful writer, in a wheelchair, and another writer who's autistic. So that's just a bit, and they're cool. They're cool guys, but those are the inroads. And
I
it's, as I said, it's minuscule in terms of all the thousands of people you see on television, starring or featuring roles, but it's coming. Okay, I'll
well,
probably be dead and gone when the big shift takes place, but at least I was part of the, because
well,
there's a real change going on in the last 3 or 4 years.
and
Anyway,
it's important that we understand that change is possible. It takes people like yourself and others who, create those inroads. You know, again, when I left corporate America, at first I said, I have no idea what I'm going to do.
right,
And that's when, my blogging became writing for somebody else. And then my son and I created the podcasting New Cleveland Radio. And it was like, hey, I can do this, and anybody can do it if they
right,
want to.
right. That's right.
But I have to ask you one personal question. I know that you're married. Okay. So this had to have been a drastic change for your wife.
Well, it was very hard at first. In fact, there was so much kind of friction and confusion. There's a country song by George Jones and Tammy Wynette called "Two-Story House," and it's about a couple getting a divorce, and they still live in the same house, but they live on two different stories because they have two different stories. That's the point of this
Right.
story. Very funny, a great song. And my wife and I had trouble communicating at first. I would withdraw, that would upset her. She was worried. I was the main breadwinner in the house. She was worried about money all the time. I was worried about money. There was a lot of tension there, and she was angry. She was very angry about this. And unfortunately, but this is what happens, she blamed me because I'm the one that had the disorder. And I thought it was unfair, but I kind of understood where she was coming from. So we lived on two different stories. She lived upstairs where I couldn't get because we couldn't afford to build a elevator.
Right.
I lived in a little bedroom downstairs, which was fine with me because I could cut myself off from everyone. So we lived in a two-story house for quite a while. And so we were on the Montel Williams show. Remember Montel had a
Oh, yes, absolutely.
so when I wrote that book about my paralysis, the best seat in the house, Montel invited me on the show to talk about stuff, this stuff. And Avery was in the audience, and Montel's a kind of spontaneous guy who also has MS, And I'm sitting next to him, and he has this stuff that looks like, I don't know, it looks like muck. It's green muck. He says, "Oh, you got to try. You got to drink this. It's really good for you. It has all the vitamins." We had a big jar of it right next to him. So between every commercial break, he would drink that stuff. Anyway, at one point, he asked my wife, who wasn't expecting to be called on. Right? He stops me and he goes, wait a minute. You stop talking. I want to know what you thought. I want to know why. Why didn't you say, oh my God, this is awful. I got to get out of here. Why didn't you just leave? Just break up, get away from this guy. And she said, she was very thoughtful because she was totally surprised, not someone that goes on a media lot. She said, well, we've already been married for 30 years. So there's a lot of water under the bridge. And it didn't make any sense for us to break up because of this. And we had two children to take care of and mother-in-law to take care of. And it just, during that period of adjustment, I sat in my room and looked at the ceiling, and she kept everything going. And then it all came together. So I thought that was a good answer because if I was in my 20s and we'd been married a year, we wouldn't be married because it does create a lot of unconscious and conscious tension. So that's why. And I'm still with her, and she still puts up with me. So I was again. That's just good luck. I got married really young, and everybody said it was so stupid to get married so young, and I said, well, pays off here.
And you're
Yeah,
and you're probably the longest married in Hollywood at this point.
yeah. Like other people, Tom Hanks may. No, we've been married for a long time.
Well, you're
So I was, again, the the fickle finger of fate sometimes plays in your hand, and sometimes doesn't play in your hand. So,
absolutely.
and so I'm thankful for what did play in my hand.
Well,
Really thankful for David Chase to show up and ask me to write a book at the time where I wasn't getting any more work in television. It was being kind of edged out. So lucky,
well,
unlucky, really unlucky in some ways, really lucky in others.
well, in today's verbiage, they say for things to happen, we must be present. And
Right,
I wasn't present most of my life. I was so busy doing for others that
right,
many opportunities passed me by.
right,
But today I'm very present. And
right.
uh, like
You
seeing
are
an article about you online, it was like, I need to know this gentleman. Uh, and our listeners need to know that there there is a way to continue your life. It's not easy, but
right.
be present and it will happen.
I will. Do we have a little more time?
Absolutely.
Well, every year, another one of my activities at Hollywood is something that Norman Lear started in 1979, a non-televised annual event called the Media Access Awards, which basically celebrates the inclusion of people with disabilities and the employment of people with disabilities in film and television. So you give awards to people like Stevie Wonder, or you may give an award to David Shore, the guy who created The Good Doctor, because he was one of the first guys ever to staff multiple people with disabilities on a show. Anyway, so I don't know why I brought this up. Oh, I really like doing that show. And last year we did the first virtual version because it's a live show. So takes place in like, in a ballroom in Hollywood. So
Sure.
people outside of there was no way people could see it. We couldn't afford, a big camera setup to broadcast it. We could barely afford anything for years, but we did this virtual show that we really liked. It got out there. Lots of people, certainly in the disability community, could see it. And there's a guy named Niall DeMarco. I don't know if you know that name. People don't, but he's great. He's deaf. He's an actor and a model. He won
Oh, yes, I know who you're talking about now. Yeah,
uh, what's a dancing show?
Dancing with the Stars.
Dancing with the he was in,
Yes.
he won that. He also won America's Top Model, and he is an actor. And he created a show for Netflix called Deaf U about the Gallaudet University and the kids that go there. Kind of a documentary series. Anyway, he's a wonderful guy and ridiculously handsome. So we said, well, good. No one's ever hired a deaf person to host an award show, so we'll do that because that's kind of what we do. And he came on, and he and I together sat down and wrote his opening. And I wrote it, but he inspired it. And he said, I've spent my adult life trying to convince people that being deaf is not a death sentence or a pathway to pain and despair. People who are deafness is only a small part of their lives, and they are just as life-loving and just as diverse and just as just as happy as other unhappy or happy as other people. And because people would say, but Niall, wasn't it, when he first got into the business, wasn't it tough being the only deaf kid in class, et cetera? Wasn't it tough? Don't you wish you could hear? And he said, well, I come from a family of 3 generations of deaf people. My entire family was deaf. I thought deaf was normal till I was like 12 years old. So he had a perfectly, fun childhood, fulfilling childhood. And people think that people with disabilities, like Niall said, it's a death sentence. You're going to get sicker. You're in a wheelchair. Oh, that's too bad. You're going to get sicker. Well, I haven't gotten much sicker in 25 years. And, or that, it's just going to fill you with, despair. And that's not true. It's just not true. I know lots and lots of people, especially where I live in LA, who are disabled and are funny and light and productive and working hard and having kids, guys, little people, dwarfs.
Right.
A lot of them work in LA. One of them, this wonderful guy named Nick Novicki.
Yes.
You should talk to him sometime. He's great. He and his wife, who's also a little person, just had their first baby. They have, life goes on.
Right.
I don't know if the baby is a little person or not, but the odds are it is. But they don't care. They're as happy as clams. And Nick's a very big activist. He could tell you all about the something called the Disability Film Challenge. This is a thing he does every day,
Right.
every year, where he invites people within a very short period of time to get together, spend their own money, and put together a film, and disabled, which is either someone in front or behind the camera is disabled. Great if it's both, but and then then a group of judges, people like what's her name? Excuse my cursing.
That's
Uh,
okay.
the woman who just won the Tony Award, who's disabled. It's terrible. I know her. I talk to her all the time. Anyway, he invites people in who are pros in the business to judge the films, and then he gives out an award ceremony. And it really gives a lot of people with disabilities a lot of confidence to do the next step. It's very much like someone making their own YouTube video, except this gives it kind of a context. It really gives people with disabilities, a shot in the arm to know that, if they can make something, it might forward their career.
Absolutely.
Ali Stroker is who I was thinking of. Ali Stroker won the Tony Award, first person in a wheelchair. First of all, the first person in a wheelchair ever to appear on Broadway, and the first person in a wheelchair ever to win a Tony Award for Oklahoma.
How wonderful.
Oh, she's when she opens her mouth, it's like, God, it's like you can't believe this voice came out of this person. It's like Ethel Merman on steroids. I mean, it is really, and she's an amazing singer and person. Anyway,
So, as we've learned, being in a wheelchair,
it's not
being
a death sentence.
being a
Not a
little
death sentence.
person, uh, maybe,
He-
losing a limb doesn't have to change. Well, it's going to change us, but it doesn't have to change us for the worst. It can
No,
change us for the better. Um, I have
it's
a very dear friend in New York who was a dancer. She still is, and she only has one leg.
right,
And I love her to death. I mean,
right.
when I need a shot in the arm,
Good.
um,
Well,
I turn to her
right,
because, you know, my life has been really good. And I'm very, very lucky. And
right,
yes, I may have lost my hearing and I've had to amplify it with hearing aids and
right.
I've adjusted. Um, and somebody once told me that I would never do podcasting because of my hearing loss. And I said, yes, I will. And
Yeah,
I will do it just as well as anybody else.
right,
So,
right. No, it's a misnomer and has to do with thousands of years of attitudes toward the disabled. Uh, the thing about what I was going to say this earlier in our conversation, there is rampant quote discrimination against people who are disabled in all walks of American life. And unlike racism, underlying racism is a kind of fear and hatred. Underlying disability discrimination is fear and ignorance. Uh, I don't know why that is. So people don't hate people with disabilities. They're just a little afraid. They're unsure about how to deal with them. They're unsure about what to say to them. They're unsure of whether they say something that's offensive. They're unsure about hiring them because of all they think it's more unpredictable. And it's a lot less unpredictable than someone who has a drug problem. You might hire someone who has a drug problem and know he has a drug problem, but know when he's not stoned, he's a really good writer and you just work around it. Uh, or discover he has a drug problem along the way and try to help him out. But people with it's an ignorance factor because people with disabilities, by virtue of this kind of innate fear, it's almost primordial fear that if I'm around that guy, I might become disabled too or something. I don't know. I could pontificate about it for a long time. But the point is that people with disabilities have been isolated for millions of years, thousands of years. They simply aren't seen in public. In Chicago in the 1880s in Chicago, there was an ordinance that said no one with a disability could be out after 6 o'clock at night. They didn't want to see people like that on the street. It would depress people. There was an attitude that people, if you're around people with disabilities, it's going to be depressing. So you don't want to be around them. And people, the Helen Keller story is a pretty example. People would just keep their child at home. If your child had cerebral palsy or something, you just kept him at home. You never got out. There was a kid upstairs. Everybody knew about him, but you rarely ever saw him. They never left the house. Uh, they didn't know how to transport him, but also they just didn't want to expose him or to ridicule and indifference because that's what he would have faced. But isolating him didn't do a lot of good. Or they put you in the turn of the century, they put kids with mental and physical disabilities in institutions,
right.
separate institutions. Uh, in New York, they had, the institution for the lame and the something. Anyway, they had funny names. I can't remember them right now. And so everybody was isolated. And so the break, began in this really after World War II and evolved after that, where people with disabilities were less isolated. And the less isolated they are, the more accepted they become. David Shore has a wonderful line, the guy who created The Good Doctor. He says, when you meet someone in a wheelchair, you see the wheelchair first. After you hang out with someone in a wheelchair for a couple of hours, you see the person, not the wheelchair. And that's true. Once you get past that, oh my God, he's in a wheelchair. Isn't that awful? Uh, you realize that, he's still a human being. He still has, moods and talents and stuff. I thought that was a good thing to say.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you for joining us today. I'd love to have you back with a few other people in the future so that, we can do, you know, maybe a round robin discussion of this because I think it's something that we have to keep talking about. People have to realize that things, the only thing that I really know that is contagious, and I
Yeah,
hate to be political, is COVID and illnesses like the flu. Um, but when my son was first diagnosed, we lost all of our friends because they were afraid their kids were going to end up with autism, and if only their kids were as functional as my son is
yeah,
today.
it's
So we've got to get over it, and you have been remarkable.
can I make one more point?
Absolutely.
To all your mothers and fathers out there, if you're in the mall and you have a little kid, 5-year-old kid, and he sees someone in a wheelchair and he stares at him, don't grab his arm and pull him away like that person is contagious. He's curious. Now, if you stare at me, that'll make me mad. But if the kid stares at me, I want to tell him what it's like to be in a wheelchair. But that's what you find to this day. People will grab their kids. They think they're either being rude or they just don't want to know that person, kind of like a homeless person. We don't want to know that person. So, mom, don't do that the next time you're in the mall.
What a great way to end today's show. Have a great day. Thank you again. And I'm going to contact a few of these other people that you mentioned today because I think
Sure.
it will be great to learn some more lessons.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much,
Thank
Karen.
you, Alan.
And
Have a great day. Bye
we'll
bye
figure
now.
it out. Sign out.
Sign out.
So I'm leaving. Bye
Uh,
bye.
Bye.